Hello, today we're continuing chapter 26 with lesson 2, which it's actually really lesson 2 and 3 we're doing today, which is about the hierarchy of the church and Pope. Okay, let's go ahead and do your warm up here. It's a loading. Okay, so what did you learn about? No, I don't want that. Okay, so the warm up today should be what does it mean that the church is human and divine? Please reflect on that with 5 sentences. Okay, so think about this. What powers have your parents passed on to you? You can see this guy here is passing on the great power of cutting grass to his son, or so why have they passed these powers on to you? Hmm? Okay, so in the Catholic Church, power is also passed on, and when the power is being passed on, just like your parents, this guy here, you may not know it, but he's maybe in the back of his mind thinking, I'm going to teach my son real well how to do this so that in 12 years I don't have to cut the grass anymore. So maybe. Um, no, God isn't doing it because he wants to take a break, but he does share his power with his people. Um, in order that they can do his work in the world. And that's been happening. It started with the 12 apostles, and that power from God has been passed on from the apostles to the bishops and to the priests ever since. Let's review. What powers did Jesus pass on to his 12 apostles? Let's watch here and listen.
This is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. This cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you. Little children, yet a little while I am with you.
So the words he said, he consecrates the Eucharist. He said, this is my body, this is my blood. And then he says, do this in remembrance of me. He's giving them permission. He's also giving them the power to do it, to consecrate the Eucharist and to be priests. So he passed on the power of that sacrament. In another verse, he said, whose sins you forgive are forgiven. That was passing on the power of the sacrament of reconciliation. Now, all the sacraments, all the power of the 7 sacraments were passed on to the 12 apostles at other points in the scriptures. How did the apostles share their power with others? In 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 14, St. Paul told Timothy, who was a bishop, that Paul had made a bishop, do not neglect the gift you have, which was conferred on you through the prophetic word with the imposition of hands by the priests. So they passed on the power of being bishops to other men who would become bishops too. Because they spread throughout the whole world, they knew they couldn't offer the sacraments and govern the church throughout the whole world. So they named men to be bishops in their place. Excuse me. And the word bishop. Okay, so here they also in Acts chapter 6 chose 7 men. They laid hands on them too, and they didn't make them priests, but they made these 7 men deacons. A deacon's job is to serve the people with the service of Christ. So bishops were made, priests were made, and then as the church kept growing, each city would have a bishop, but they were realizing that there were so many Christians in the city that the bishop couldn't see them very often. So the bishop started naming priests to be his helpers. So there's priests, bishops, and deacons. And they go in this order of kind of like first everyone is made a deacon, and then they're made priests, and then they're made bishops. So there are 3 degrees of holy orders: the deacon, the priest, and the bishop. This bishop has quite the hairdo. I've never seen a bishop with that hairdo, but hey, who knows? So, but each of them have one job, and that job is to make Jesus Christ present in the church today. So I'll just answer this very simple question. What are the 3 degrees of holy orders? Just name them and please restate your sentence. Don't just write the answer. Pause it and do that. Okay, so the 3 degrees of holy orders: deacon, priest, and bishop. Let's take a closer look at each one, okay? So the first degree is the diaconate, or making someone a deacon. The deacon is a man ordained to share not in so much the sacraments of Christ, giving grace, but a deacon's job is to share in the service of Christ. Just like Jesus was constantly healing people who were sick and spending time with the lonely and cleansing the ill. And so a deacon is really sharing in that part of Jesus' ministry. The word deacon actually literally means servant in Greek. So deacons do celebrate Mass with the priest. They have a sash instead of that stole. It's just kind of one guy that goes across. But their main ministry is not with the sacraments. Their main ministry is visiting the poor, the elderly, and the sick. And they bring Jesus to them by being a servant to them. The second degree of holy orders is the priesthood. So a priest is ordained to serve in the sacramental ministry of Christ by administering 6 of the sacraments. A priest can't administer one of them. We'll talk about which one in a second. Now, important to know is that when a deacon becomes a priest, they do not stop being a deacon. It's so important that the priest always remembers that at his core, he's a servant. Only after he's been a servant does he become a priest. So he serves, and then he can give the sacraments of, especially reconciliation and the Eucharist are so central. But also the anointing of the sick, and he oversees matrimony and baptism. Now, interestingly, the deacon can also do baptism, and they can do a wedding too, just so you know. Okay, the third degree is the bishopric, so making bishops. A bishop is ordained first as a priest, then he becomes a bishop, and he's ordained to teach, govern, and administer all 7 sacraments. The one sacrament a bishop can do that a priest can't do is holy orders. A bishop can ordain priests. A priest cannot ordain other priests. So first degree, the diaconate. We already read this. Now, guys, when you see a deacon, you're supposed to see this. Jesus washing the feet of his apostles, and through those apostles, all of us. He washes all of us of all of our impurities and all of our sins. So a deacon is supposed to show us Christ the servant. What is the deacon supposed to be a sign of? The answer is Christ the servant. So I'll help you out with that first one. You have to do the rest of it. Okay? Now, I hope you paused the video and did that. Okay? Next is the priest. So the priest is he never stops being a deacon. So the priest still shows us Christ the servant. But he also shows us Christ crucified, especially through his celibacy. By a priest sacrificing, having a family and a wife, he's showing us Jesus on the cross. And he shows us Jesus' mercy and grace through giving us Jesus in the sacraments. So deacon, he's still a deacon, he's still a servant, but now he also shows us Jesus crucified, and he brings us Jesus' love and grace. So what is the priest a sign of? Okay. Pause the video and do that. Now, a bishop. A bishop is still a deacon. He's still a servant. He's still a priest. Okay, it's very important. He still gives the Eucharist and all that. But he also shows us Christ the King. So the reason that a bishop wears what's called a mitre, which is this big hat, is that was something that the leaders of the Byzantine Empire wore. That's when they started wearing it, and that was to show that they are leaders and rulers of the church, which is an even higher authority than the leaders of the government. So, just for example, if the bishop says to do one thing and the government says to do another, we need to do what the bishop says because the bishop is a higher authority. God is higher than the president. Okay, so the bishop shows us Christ the King. Please describe that. What is the bishop a sign of? Okay. So you've now been able to describe all three holy orders. Let's look at how a bishop is chosen. Okay, we'll just watch the beginning of this video here.
When a Catholic priest becomes a bishop today, it's usually because he was appointed by the Pope. The Pope is free to select anyone he chooses when it comes to the appointments of most Latin Rite bishops. Though he has given plenty of advice for church leaders, from the local diocese to the Congregation for Bishops at the Vatican, the Pope typically makes the final call, and he's not required to select a candidate who has been recommended to him.
So that's basically the Pope picks every single bishop. Okay, so it's been like that for quite some time. So how is a bishop chosen? So like when Archbishop Vigneron retires, how will the new bishop be chosen? Well, the Pope will pick the new bishop. Okay. All right. So it's important to know that the priests are really just the bishop's helper. As you can kind of see in this picture, and as you can see here, here's Bishop Nicholas of Tarsus, also known as Saint Nick or Santa Claus, and these are his priests, his two helpers, helping him run the diocese of the North Pole. So the priest is the bishop's helpers. So please write that. The priest is a bishop's helper, okay? He helps him administer the sacraments for the whole diocese because the bishop can't get to every church. So what's the Pope? So we know that Peter was the rock, and this is Matthew chapter 16, verse 18 through 19. Peter was the rock that Jesus built his church upon. So here's a picture. Here's a building, and here's the rock foundation. The building is safe because it's built on the rock. Okay, the building won't collapse into different pieces because it's built on one rock. Would you ever build a building on a rock and then remove the rock? No. What would happen? The building would collapse, of course. So Peter served as the first rock. But when he died, do you think that Jesus just said, well, we don't need the rock foundation anymore. Let's get those rocks out of there? No. So the church is still resting on the rock foundation, and it will be until the end. And that rock foundation is the successor to Peter. Peter served as the first bishop of Rome. He was the leader of the entire church as well as its rock foundation. The Bishop of Rome is the rock foundation of Jesus' whole church. So the successors of Peter, also known as the bishops of Rome or the popes, are still the leaders of the entire church today. They choose each bishop, and the pope has ultimate authority in the church. Why? Because of this. He is the highest authority on the whole planet. So all of the church laws are underneath the Pope, and technically he could change any one of them, and he doesn't really have to follow them either because he is above all of the church laws. He is the highest authority, and his authority is supposed to show us God's authority. With that said, he doesn't just go breaking church laws because he respects them. He is a humble man, not a tyrant. Okay, so describe What authority does the Pope have? Okay. Pause the video and do that. Okay, the last thing you might want to know about is what is a cardinal? Maybe you've heard about cardinals. So the cardinals are the very few bishops. There's not many of them. There's a couple hundred, maybe at the most, that the Pope chooses to be his special advisors. So in the old days, the Pope would only have 12 cardinals. This was in the early Middle Ages. He would only have 12 cardinals because that symbolized the 12 apostles, and they would all live in Rome with him. Later, the Pope started to have 72 cardinals, and that represented the 72, I believe, the 72 assistants that Moses had in the desert. And they'd be a little bit more spread out. Some of them might be in different countries in Europe. Today, the Pope has even more cardinals, and the reason for that is that he needs to keep, I guess, a better watch on the whole world. So, in order to do that, he has cardinals all over the world. For example, he had this cardinal here. John Paul II had this cardinal here in South America. His name was Cardinal Jorge Cardinal Borgoglio, and he ended up becoming Pope Francis, of course. So every pope basically starts as a cardinal. What does the word cardinal mean? They're not named after the bird. Okay, the word cardinal means hinge in Latin, and they're called that because the fate of the church hinges on the leadership of the cardinals. They wear red also, not to look like the bird, but to signify that they are always willing to join the martyrs by giving their blood to defend the faith. So the color red is supposed to be a constant reminder that they should be willing to die for Jesus. Now, what's the connection between the bird? Okay, the bird was named after them. People first saw these birds and they thought, hey, that bird looks like a cardinal. So they started calling it a cardinal. But yeah, the cardinals in the Catholic Church came before the cardinal, the bird. So please just write what a cardinal is. It's an advisor to the Pope, ultimately, okay? I told you a lot more information than you needed to know. All right. So what is the hierarchy of the Catholic Church? This is just, let's look back at this picture we saw at the beginning. Ultimately, the people are at the bottom, but every person in the Catholic Church is a part of Christ. So just keep that in mind. But then how is the church ruled? The church is ruled by deacons, priests are above them, bishops are above them, archbishops are above them. Archbishops are bishops of a big city, and the big city is called an archdiocese. There's cardinals above them. Finally, above the cardinals is the Pope, and above the Pope is only God. So please list the levels of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. Just go ahead and list all those levels we just talked about. All right, that's all for today. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon.